Okay.
And I'll invite John Nissen to kick us off. John.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yep, good.
Yeah.
Yes, welcome to our first meeting of 2023, and wishing everybody a happy new year, of course. Right, I've left the agenda rather open, so we can decide as we go along what people would like to discuss. Various things have cropped up recently. There's been an interesting contribution as a result of the last meeting, suggesting we ought to have a business plan, and if we treat this as a business, we should be concentrating on raising money to do the things that are needed to be done, though that is a bit of a challenge because it's going to be billions of dollars to do what's necessary for the cooling effort. And there's also issues of governance for doing the cooling. So we are agreed on our goal, which is eventually planetary restoration. And we agree that the pathway to that has to involve cooling technology, and mainly SRM, but we could also include things like cloud removal, and then manipulations of ice on the sea ice and things like that, which are kind of local interventions. But the sum total has to be a huge amount of cooling, and we've identified the most critical things to cool. The most urgency is for cooling the Arctic and the Antarctic, and the Himalayas come fairly close behind that for cooling in the priorities. So there is a huge number of barriers to cooling the Arctic in particular. And but we do have some allies. So we have the Cambridge Centre for Climate Repair is backing the freezing of the Arctic. So that's a very important ally for us. And we've had a presentation from Sean Fitzgerald, who works there. And so we can try and follow up on these leads that we've had, and try and consolidate our position and move forward. So there's the financial backing idea, treated as a business, and there is a startup that's actually reckoning that 1 gram of SO2 offsets a ton of CO2 emissions or something like that. It's a kind of deliberately provocative venture, starting very small, of course.
Sorry, you're talking about making sunsets, are you, John?
Yeah, that's making sunsets, correct. Yeah. So that's an interesting new movement on the scene. Disruptive technology, treating stratospheric aerosol injection as a disruptive technology.
John, can I just interrupt very briefly?
Yeah.
Point of order. I suspect others have just received an email from Evan Hughes, who, oh, you're there. Right, I'll go away. So you got in, good, sorry. I missed you. Carry on.
Okay, and then we've had some ideas about treating the Arctic and the climate crisis as the long tail of a distribution, and we've interpreted that, I think, correctly as when you've got tipping points and exponential effects, positive feedback, things will get worse, and they will not just get worse linearly, as the climate experts tend to linearize everything in rather wishful thinking, but they're exponential, and until some negative feedback kicks in, they will grow exponentially. We do have negative feedback kicking in with the Arctic sea ice, because as it breaks up in the autumn, the outgoing radiation increases through the open water remaining open for much longer.
So, John, this is the paper that Robert Chris circulated on regression to tail, and
that's right. So we've had some discussion recently on that. I'm just trying to summarize your immediate response, Robert.
Very good.
which I think is all we would all agree that we're heading for a very bad place unless something's done quickly. I think what I liked most about what he was saying is he was pinpointing and stressing the absolute urgency for immediate, rapid, and to scale deployment. And I've been arguing for that for some time. And I think that's our PRAG's position, is that we really need to have that urgency. You know, if you're canoeing along a river and you're into rapids, and you know there's going to be a waterfall ahead, you quickly go into reverse and paddle in the opposite direction. Well, we're instead of that, we're just, the international community is saying, you know, we mustn't paddle so hard, but that's not a solution to the problem, because we're being carried ever faster towards the waterfall. So that's an analogy which I think is quite appropriate. We don't know exactly where the waterfall is and how high it is, but there's not much point trying to measure it. What we need to do immediately is to reverse the direction we're going, which in the case of the planet is to start cooling it. And the critical, the tipping points are mostly in the Arctic. There's the Thwaites Glacier showing signs of acceleration. So that's reached a tipping point, and that will be another acceleration to deal with. And we've got general glaciers around the globe are retreating. I don't think the acceleration is quite the same, though. The Thwaites Glacier is very serious because the thing that's been slowing it down was a huge ice shelf, and that's breaking up and disappearing. So the termination of the Thwaites is in a critical state, and it's not being buttressed.
John, I think it's
Yep.
good to hear your overview of some of the issues that are around at the moment, and yeah, I'd like to just also wish everybody a productive, effective, hopeful new year, and really glad to see everyone join us. We've got a couple of people here who I don't think have joined our planetary restoration meetings previously, so I think it would be helpful if we just give a couple of people an opportunity to introduce themselves. Would anyone like to introduce? I see Paul Klinkman has given us a brief introduction in the chat. And John, are you happy to hear from others who are new?
Yes, indeed. Let's go through quickly, and then we can proceed with a discussion on. I mentioned two topics. There are lots of things that we've started. We decided we ought to do last year, and we need to pursue them vigorously over the next few weeks, actually.
Sure, and I think the nature of these meetings is that there's a combination of just sort of general think tank sharing of perspectives on issues of concern and practical questions about what we should do, and so
we could summarize that as the things that we decided we should do last year, and then additional things that we should do this year, and we can add to the list as we go along, I think. So over to introductions.
Shall I introduce myself?
Please, Meta.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm Meta Spencer. I'm in Toronto. I'm a retired sociology professor at University of Toronto and editor of Peace Magazine and Project Save the World. I'm also engaged with the Canadian Pugwash Group, and I have been showing, I've produced by now about 538 talk shows about serious global issues. So Stephen Salter is one of my regulars because I've been very interested in interviewing people about global issues, global warming issues in particular. And although we have 6 global issues that we attend to. And recently I approached my Canadian Pugwash group with a proposal which they accepted, which is that over a period of about 4 to 5 months, I'll be holding a series of talk shows, each one lasting about an hour, to discuss 4 different possible interventions that each have some potential for aiding the climate change problem. And one of them has to do with the proposal based on Stephen Salter's own work to refreeze part of Hudson Bay so that it'll be frozen year-round, at least part of it. And so we have been holding sort of an inquiry. Every Monday, we have a different conversation about one of these 4 different global threats, of which Stephen's Hudson Bay idea is one. And we'll have about 3 more on that topic. My interest right now in attending this is to begin to sort out some of the different interventions that I've come across since doing this one project that Stephen proposed. I find that he's not the only game in town. Seems that there are people with ideas about other things to do to the clouds and other ways of refreezing the water and so on. So there are about 5 more that I have come across that I don't quite know how to appraise. So maybe over the course of time in listening to you people talk about things like thinning the cirrus clouds and the mixed phase clouds and spraying water on top of existing ice as one might to a skating rink. Maybe I'll get some idea about how to prioritize these various options and get some sense of where to go with my own inquiry. So that's about all I need to talk. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks very much, Meta. I think that's really interesting, and we'll just continue the open mic. Anyone who wishes to contribute.
Yes, hello. My name is Steve Penningroth, and I recently retired from the Community Science Institute, a nonprofit in Ithaca, New York, which I founded 20 years ago, and which runs a certified lab, and we partner with about 250 volunteers who collect water samples. We analyze them and put the certified results up on the internet in our database, which is freely accessible to the public. So that's what I've been doing the last 20 years. Before that, I taught at Cornell. I did some toxicology while I worked at the University of Medicine and Dentistry for 15 years, teaching pharmacology and toxicology and doing research on cell motility. So since I retired, I've become very interested in the problem of climate change, and I've been attending the meetings of the Healthy Planet Action Coalition, which to me are like a master class in climate issues. And that's how I learned about this group. And I'm very happy to just sit and listen and learn as much as I can. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Welcome. I was actually quite interested in Meta's comments about refreezing Hudson Bay, and some of the challenges that people are noting. I think Jonathan Cole mentioned that the context of extreme cold that people are seeing in the North America at the moment presents something of a social challenge to action to cool the planet, and yet I think that the science is very clear that an action like refreezing Hudson Bay would be a helpful starting point in restabilizing the overall climate of the Northern Hemisphere. And I was interested, Meta, that Stephen's been engaging with you on that. So thank you for bringing it up.
There are a couple of people whose names I don't recognize. Lynn Eggins.
So if Lynn and also Angel Kosfink.
And Angel Kosfink.
If you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be welcome.
Hello, thank you. I'm Lynn. Look, I have to say I'm just an ordinary citizen belonging to a strong bird action group in Sydney. But so I'm completely interested in the whole process that you're all going through. I'm afraid I can't really contribute in any way, not being a scientist and not having a lot of strength, but my interest would be how to publicize this to the general public. I think, people don't really, many people wouldn't have a clue about what you're talking about in any way, shape or form. And I'm really interested. I tried writing a letter to the Guardian, but it just wouldn't go. And I don't know how to even make that work. So I'm not doing too well on that score, but I do think it's important that, the general public needs to understand that there's certainly a strong foot and maybe, get behind it really somehow. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. It's most interesting and really I feel honoured to be able to listen to you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. And I think you're friends with Rebecca Bishop. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Yes, thanks.
Angel.
Yeah, yes, I am an ex-government employee. I worked for EPA for 22 years, but in the technical side, not necessarily in the environmental side. And I am very intrigued about this group because in my experience, systems developed from the beginning when units came about, and eventually you needed to coordinate the environmental issues or whatever issue, economical issue. And as an example, the airplane was created as a single unit. Eventually, there were so many of them that we needed to get organized. And the way I see this issue is that we are trying to deal with the system for the first time and correct the system and not do it from a unit environment. There are some ways of handling it that are trying to just create units that are going to take care of the problem. But most of the solutions that I have seen are system units, which are very, very difficult to handle. So I am intrigued by that mostly, how to deal with a scientific problem at the system level and not necessarily do it by unit. Social systems work like that, economical systems work like that, and I am an engineer, so I tend to think about units and not necessarily the whole system.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Go on,
John.
How do you pronounce your Christian name? Angle? Sorry, you're muted. You're muted, Angle, is it?
Sorry, my name is Angel. I am from Argentina. And therefore, yeah, and therefore,
Angel, yes.
Angel is, but I have lived in the US for more than 50 years now, so it's Angel, and I know that people think that I am a lady and not a man. Okay, but that's beside it.
Well, welcome, and it's. I think your comment about approaching things as a system is exactly what's attracted everyone to the Planetary Restoration Action Group, and it's a topic that Robert Chris has written a doctorate on. So systems thinking is something that's direly needed for measures to address climate change.
So I've tried to summarize our systems thinking in a paper for the AGU, which I presented at the AGU as a poster session, and I gave a short 10-minute talk about it. So you can certainly read our paper, and if you join our group, I can attach it to reply on this thread that Robert started. Okay. Yes. So that was our attempt at a kind of scientific paper which would be suitable for scientists. We did decide last year that we would try and convene a meeting of PRAG, this is the Planetary Restoration Action Group, with some communicators to see if we could devise a good communication strategy, because we realize that's a weakness at the moment. And we also have, I have undertaken to write a book with Peter Wadhams. I'm not absolutely sure. I think neither of us are really sure whether we're going to go ahead with it, but that's what we was agreeing to last year. So that'll be a good thing to try and put something in a way that ordinary people can understand. And Peter's already written a brilliant book called A Farewell to Ice, which I can recommend to anybody who hasn't already read it.
John, can I suggest that we just proceed with inviting people to to put up their hands and just
Yeah.
to comment in order that we put them up. So we have requests to speak from Daniel Keeve and Victor Smetacek. So Daniel, please.
Hi. Yeah, this is a point about systems, and also Meta's question. Really, it was an open question about how to appraise the different cooling approaches, and I just thought the concept that obviously Ye Tao came up with of the energy rejected on investment, as opposed to Charles Hall's energy return on investment, is quite relevant there, because there's sort of magnitudes of difference in the energy efficiency with which different technologies can achieve their cooling in different ways. And when you look at it in that regard, and you have to, because basically we're so dependent on the energy system for food, for everything, and the way that we go about things on a large scale will be, that'll be a crucial factor, I think. So I think that's quite an interesting concept, and also a way of gauging the effectiveness of technologies. Having said that, there might be some that don't come out so well in terms of energy investment, but because they're so crucial in terms of protecting particular ecosystems or regional projects for like highly treasured, for instance, the Great Barrier Reef, they find a particular approach that is highly energy intensive, we'd probably think it's worth doing. But
Daniel, that concept of energy rejected on investment, I don't find that particularly intuitive. Whereas Ye Tao at the MIR group has also used the concept of cooling return on investment, which I do find much more intuitive and direct, to just say that the impact on watts per square meter of radiative forcing of any action should be the determinant of investment to address global warming. And the trouble with that analysis is that it leads to the view that carbon-based approaches, that is changing the amount of greenhouse gases, are quite marginal to the immediate problem of tipping points. That is that tipping points, that the only things with a reasonable cooling return on investment in Ye Tao's assessment, which I think is quite empirical and scientific, actions to either directly address albedo, or there's also the removal of heat. But it's this focus on heat and light that is a bit of a paradigm shift that comes out of that approach, which you described as energy rejected, which is a bit of a confusing description to me. But
that was his initial. That was his term when he did the presentation to HPAC a few months ago. He's probably updated it to. Is it basically the same meaning? It's just different.
Jonathan Cole has been working with, and Jonathan's just commented in the chat about the language. Sorry, but yeah, sorry, Daniel. What was your other point that you were making?
Yeah, that was just it. I thought it was worth bringing that up. I mean, obviously, cooling return on investment, I think, is probably the same concept, just put in a slightly different way. But I just think it's an important measure to include, to take into account. But obviously, there has to be some flexibility there. I think it might be a useful thing if we're addressing. I mean, Angel was saying about how changing systems, and he's worked within government, a particular government department, a really crucial one. When talking to certain government departments, they will look at things that are empirical as one of the measures, and that's where those sort of tools might be a useful argument. In favour, obviously, things like marine cloud brightening, which come out favourably in those empirical measurements. So it's quite interesting to have that, I think.
Thanks, Daniel. Let's move on to Victor.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I have a question, actually. And this is something which has been frustrating me for a long time, because every time we have a particularly cold phase or a warm phase here, I'm sitting in North Germany, we always know that somewhere else it's the opposite, because the Arctic is a, it's this gyre, the vortex. So why don't we ever get to see an overall view, a North Pole view of this vortex? Like when we had this bomb cyclone dipping into North America, deep down into America, somewhere else there must have been a rush of hot air. I mean, correspondingly warm air into the Arctic from probably the other side, from the Pacific, or I don't know. I mean, I couldn't find it. I looked in the web and I saw there are some North Pole views, of the Arctic. But that's what we really need is to get the people who have access to these data and can present them in a way that the public immediately understands. And that's how we will get our message across about the need to cool the Arctic, because we will show that this whole thing is just wobbling away for all it's worth. So do you all know? I mean, I come from an institute, the Alfred Wegener Institute, which has meteorologists, and I have bugged them to tell them, come on, why don't you get this stuff going? Nothing happens. I've just, that's why I said I'm being frustrated. So perhaps this group could be able to do something about that. That's it.
It's
Thanks.
such a good point, Victor. And I think some of the diagrams that I've seen them through the Arctic Ice Facebook page, which I've found a really valuable community discussion which relates to some of the issues that we're talking about. And what we're seeing is steady improvement in the graphical display of climate effects. And it's I just think it's quite remarkable. If you think back just 5 or 10 years ago, the quality of meteorology that's available to the general public has just advanced by leaps and bounds, and so things like this polar vortex with the cold weather that's created for North America and corresponding warmer weather for Europe has led to people thinking in systems terms, but also many who don't think in systems terms. I'll just invite Stephen to respond on that.
Yes, if you want to see what's happening anywhere in the world, I suggest that you download a package called Windy, and this gives you an amazing amount of information. You can have Mercator or a spherical projection. You can twiddle anything, and you get forecasts over the next couple of weeks. And there's about 60 different parameters you can to map. So Windy, just put Windy into Google.
Is that with an I or a Y?
Why?
Why?
windy.com, I think it is.
Yeah, but if you just put Windy into Google, you'll get it. There's a free one which tells you an awful lot. You can pay a tiny amount of extra and you get even more. But it'll give you, pressures at different altitudes and waves and currents and all the temperature things, all the snow cover. Windy.
Can I respond to Victor directly? He's raised a terrible fact of life, is that the Met Office and IPCC, Met Offices and institutes like his own are in denial of what's happening in the Arctic. They are in denial that the Arctic is cause of weather extremes, and there's nothing about how the polar vortex has descended into the US as a result of a reduced temperature gradient. The temperature gradient between the Arctic and the tropics is the thing that holds 3 bands of weather systems known as Hadley cells in place. When you decrease that gradient, the Rossby waves meander and the polar vortex can even break up and blobs can separate. And as you say, Victor, you get a warming in the Arctic when one of these blobs disappears. But it's not, the vortex also kind of can break up into 3 or 4 blobs which behave separately. So there's a lot of new kind of variation in the system that gives rise to these extremes.
It's interesting, John, that a lot of commentary that I've seen in the Arctic Ice discussion group has suggested that exactly what you're saying is just systematically excluded from the mass media analysis of the extraordinary weather that the US has experienced, which is surprising.
Yeah, and another thing that's being denied is that that we're on a course to exceed 1.5 degrees warming, whatever we do on CO2 emissions. But we had somebody on the BBC Radio 4 this morning saying, you know, the climate experts, they wheel out saying that, you know, if we can reduce our emissions, we could stay below 1.5. I mean, Hansen points out that it's absolutely impossible. We could do that.
Now, Victor, you were going to comment again?
No, I was just checking windy, and what I would like to see is the North Pole view. You know, windy is a Mercator. It's the whole the globe. I want to see the Arctic from the North Pole, and have that established so that you can convey to the public what's going on, really.
Yes, a visual representation of that. Jennifer Francis did some very good presentations earlier on. She seems to have stopped doing that since she's become on the editorial for the Scientific American. So her last contribution to the Scientific American hardly mentioned the Arctic and the Arctic amplification at all, talking about other kind of weather things.
What can we do to stimulate people to make this kind of graphics? I mean, meteorology departments all over.
You wrote to your, you've been trying to persuade your own institute, Victor.
It hasn't worked.
It hasn't worked. Would it be a help if our groups all wrote to your institute saying Victor is right? We could do that.
Yeah.
Why not?
Why can't we link meteorology departments all over the world together? I mean, they have the tools, but
they're all agreed not to admit what's going on in the Arctic.
No, but surely they won't deny giving us this bird's eye view of the Arctic from the North Pole.
Oh, well, I think that's excellent if we can get a good presentation, a good really perspective on what's happening.
It's a very good point, Victor, and I think, you know, if there are some of these diagrams out there, but let's move on. And
yes,
we've got requests to comment from Manajo, then Doug, then Angel. Sorry, I think Robert Chris was earlier. So Manajo.
Yes, I just wanted to let the people that were interested in public outreach and education know that here in the Hudson Valley, we started a climate science and potential climate solutions working group. And we've created an outline, an annotated outline. The basic document is John Nissen's original white paper, and I'll add the AGU paper. but also in this area, a friend of mine from a long time has just published a book on climate change. It's very comprehensive, but he includes geoengineering in chapter 7 as a subsection of false solutions. And he goes on to, it's very similar to the arguments that Bill McKibben made. And in both cases, I want to kind of make a point in that they call the people that are exploring geoengineering technologies, you know, crazy or very negative terms. And to me, that's a sign that that it's absolutely not an objective analysis. But I want us to be careful not to do the same, because we have to keep the dialogue at a way that we listen to each other. So just to summarize, we have an outline that we're developing and trying to organize a vast amount of information I've accumulated in the 6 months or so that I've been listening and on the email threads. And we have a PowerPoint, and also Doug has a PowerPoint that we each made separately a while ago. So there are some basic foundational tools, and that's what I'm most interested in, is helping elected officials, including those, some of whom are in positions to actually take action or help with implementation, and the general public have enough understanding of climate science and the proposed technologies that they're not going to get run over by articles like Bill McKibben's or Mark Dunley's and others. And in the outline, the ones that are pro-geoengineering have a green highlight, and the ones that are opposed have a red highlight. And we're trying to be sure that as we add another document, if there's something new in the opposite direction, that it's included so people can hear and come to understand the full range of the dialogue, and then see what makes sense, and try to really have respectful, solution-oriented collaborative conversations. But I just wanted some of the new people to know that here in the Hudson Valley, we are trying to do essentially public education and outreach. Last thing I want to say is that I just came back from the inauguration or swearing in of our new county executive, who basically wrote New York's climate action plan. So, you know, in addition to educating the public, we do have access. I reached out to Peter Buffett to try to get him the information that Brian put together on marine permaculture, et cetera. So we're trying to cultivate that public education and also target elected officials and people that could potentially fundraise. So just wanted to give a quick update for people that.
Thanks very much, Manager. That's really helpful, and good on you for all of your work. Doug.
Thank you. And Manager, just so you know, that 32-minute presentation is now down to 12 minutes with additional slides.
Great.
So,
well, let's be in touch.
So since I started looking for this image behind me for Victor, I've got about 5 different topics I'd like to talk about. But is that what you're looking for? This is
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
straight
yeah,
down.
yeah. Right.
So they're in the web, in the chat, there's a website and it's called Net Weather Charts and Graphs or something. That allows you to look anywhere in the world from any direction you want, any size, any perspective, and it shows the wind direction of that particular. Look how crazy that is. I mean, that's nuts. Now it's
I'm going
much
to run
more.
for that, yeah.
It's much more normal now. If this is like a month ago, it's much more normal, but it's way down around Texas. It needs to be up around Canada, not Texas. So if you go and look at it every day for a while, you will see it's bizarre. I don't know how to communicate that. So on the other half a dozen issues, I'm not going to try to approach them now, but I just want to say that I believe Jim Hansen's preprint and comments prior to pre-review, and maybe peer review will actually not vindicate, but substantiate what he's saying. Basically, I think is going to eliminate the geoengineering confusion, because he's calling out geoengineering having been conflated with all the other CDR and SRMs. And so I think, and in particular, Michael Mann has refuted, attacked Jim Hansen's paper, the December 13th paper. And I think, and not to mention too many names, but I think Bill McKibben, who espouses no geoengineering generally, which is an umbrella for everything, and Michael Mann in the same boat, I think they're going to be made aware that they're making a big mistake. So watch Jim Hansen. That's all I'm going to say right now. There's so many other subjects. But I just wanted to pass that on to Victor.
Yeah,
Thanks.
great. Thanks.
Thanks, Doug. And I see you managed to engage with Jim Hansen. I think Herb has also engaged with Jim on Twitter, but Michael Mann is a little bit less accommodating in terms of dialogue on Twitter.
Oh, he blocked me on. So I posted something on November 12th. He blocked me on November 22nd. And since then, I've learned there are so many people, they just simply ask a question and they get blocked on Twitter. So he is not ever going to come down. I think Jim Hansen is going to bring him down through his paper. But I'm not worried about those guys anymore. I think we need, anyway, don't get me going on my.
Interesting debate. Let's go on to Angle.
Yes, I think that Victor brought up an interesting question, but unfortunately there are no airplanes or no satellites that go over the poles. The satellites go at an angle and they reach, I think, between 60 and 70 degrees, and airplanes also don't fly very much over there. And we need to recognize that the knowledge that we have in weather is mostly due to the existence of airplanes and satellites and boats that go in the sea, and they don't go on the poles. That's all.
Thanks, Angle. So I see Robert Chris has added some comments in response to Victor's question. Robert, do you want to speak?
Yes, just really, I'm not familiar with these other websites, but the one that I refer to is nullschool.net, which uses a live feed from NASA, and it's great fun to play with because it comes up with a globe which you can zoom in and out of. You can turn it to any place you like and zoom in or out. If you want to look at it as if you were standing above the North Pole or the South Pole, you can do that. And one of the great things is you can set the height, which is measured not in meters, but in pascals. So by setting the height at 700 or 500, you're up into where the jet stream is, and you can see really clearly. I mean, it's a live site, so you can see it moving. And if you move it down to sea level, you can see where the wind's blowing outside your window. It's quite an extraordinary thing. So that's quite a good way of looking to see what is going on around the planet. And it is when you read these reports about anticyclones and hurricanes, it's quite fascinating watching them on this website in kind of live action, because you can really see them. Coming back to this, one of the things we need to remember, picking up this systems point, is we need to be constantly aware that the climate system includes all 5 of the ecospheres, the cryosphere, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, the lithosphere, and the biosphere. And they're all intimately interlinked. So when we talk about, when it's getting warmer in one place, it needs to be getting cooler in another place. That other place might actually be in the ocean. And we need to remember that more than 90% of the extra heat that represents global warming has actually got into the oceans. It's not in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
So, and this will again vary from time to time, because the ocean carries that heat around the planet and does different things. So it's a really complex setup that we're trying to confront here and get a handle on.
That's right, Robert. Now, I was talking about the scale of a week or 2 weeks, experienced weather. When you hear people telling you that where's the global warming, I mean, it's getting that cold, and you tell them that, yes, the global warming is on the other side.
Yeah,
that's
but,
what
I mean, one needs to remember because the planet has seasons. We're tilted towards the sun. So when it's summer up here, it's winter down there, and vice versa. And so all these things are going on simultaneously. When it's light, it's dark. So there's a lot of diurnal variation and seasonal variation. So it's never just getting warmer or just getting colder in one place, or even doing it evenly. It's a fiendishly complex and unpredictable setup. The final point I just wanted to pick up on was this thing about Hansen and his use of geoengineering. I'm not in contact with Hansen himself, but I am in contact with Dan Galpin, who is his attorney and with whom he works very closely. And I wrote something up on one of these postings, which Dan picked up on and came back to me on. And one of the issues is the way that Hansen has used the term geoengineering, because he's used it in a rather unusual way. Geoengineering was originally defined back 20, 30 years ago as being a deliberate intervention in the climate for the specific purpose of ameliorating climate change. And what Hansen has done here, which is what other people have done as well, is he's kind of taken the whole of human activity and all this inadvertent stuffing of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and he's called that geoengineering. Well, that's actually not how geoengineering, the term, emerged. And I think it slightly kind of muddies the whole pool and makes things unnecessarily complicated. And there was an interesting exchange. I can't remember whether it was Herb or there was an email exchange that was shared with us, where Hansen acknowledged that in the sentence where he says that SRM may have some value, that the reason he said may rather than will was because of peer pressure from the other authors on the paper. So, this illustrates that, there's a lot of politics going on behind the scenes about these small details and the way that academics want to present their findings and their knowledge, because they're so desperately concerned about not overclaiming their findings. But my reading of Hansen's paper was that, you could just easily replace the word may with will, with is, or will, because there's no doubt that what he produces is a very compelling argument. But the other thing that we should also note about that paper is that he does caveat it all the way through with some quite careful wording about the lack of empirical data to support their claims. The lack of current empirical data, because they're relying heavily on paleo data to reach their conclusions. And he's saying that they would be much more robust conclusions if they had more reliable current data on some of these questions. And that, of course, is what you might call academic integrity, but it also provides the hook for all the objectors to say, well, it's not definite, they're not sure, it could be something else, and raising all these ideas of uncertainty in the science. When actually what Hansen is saying, I think, is it's not a fact, but it is pretty compelling. And the likelihood is that it will be confirmed as the data becomes available. My piece.
Now, can I just check, Victor, did you want to respond to Robert before we move on?
No, thanks. I would be really glad if you could put on the email all the links that have been mentioned here. I'm not good at retrieving them from the Zoom.
Okay,
record.
so I'll circulate the chat. And
That would be fantastic.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you.
and I'd just like to welcome Peter Wadhams.
Yes,
Thanks very much for joining us, Peter. We've actually mentioned you a couple of times in our conversations about the relation between the North Pole and recent weather. So good to see you.
Yes, well, sorry I'm late. I had trouble getting on. This is in connection with the refreezing the Arctic concept, or is it? Or
yes, perhaps we'll just move on to Daniel.
Hi. Yeah, just a couple of points on obviously we've been talking about the jet stream and how we're talking about Arctic amplification being ignored by the mainstream media generally. But there was one thing I noticed mentioned in the mainstream media. I can't remember who it was quoted from, but someone mentioned that the heat in the North Pacific intruding into the Arctic was a key factor in affecting the polar vortex sort of coming down to the US, so obviously affecting the jet stream. I don't know if anyone else came across that as a key factor, and I'm just wondering if that was particularly significant. I didn't look at, for instance, nullschool.net or whatever to look at the temperature in the North Pacific at the time, but that's quite interesting.
Yeah, Daniel, can you find that reference, because that's very valuable.
I'll try and find.
Because it's heat from the North Pacific is adding to the problems in the Arctic and the loss of sea ice. So it all links up with Arctic amplification, and anybody who's inadvertently admitting that there's Arctic amplification going on, which is affecting the jet stream, that's a potential ally for us.
Okay, I'll try and retrace my steps to see where I found that.
You see, Michael Mann is a potential ally for us, because he says the models are inadequate when it comes to dealing with Arctic amplification and also the effect on weather extremes. So you see, he can be an ally on one thing and be an enemy on another. So you curry favor. You try and be positive with the people. It's like developing an Olympic athlete. You concentrate on what they're good at, and their faults tend to fade away then.
I think that issue about refreezing the Arctic, Daniel, and the relationship with the Pacific Ocean is something that Stephen Salter has looked at in the context of marine cloud brightening, with the argument that the main cause of Arctic melting is the warmer currents that are flowing into the Arctic through the Barents Strait and from the Gulf Stream. And so therefore, if you can use marine cloud brightening to cool down the temperature of the water that's flowing into the Arctic, then that will have a significant system benefit in slowing the Arctic melt. Stephen, is that correct?
Look, you can. Yes, the only negative side of doing it further south is that you have to wait a bit longer for the effect. We can do it right up to the Arctic ice for about 3 months of the year. Then it gets, you can't go on after that, but you could do it anywhere, particularly along the Gulf Stream, where that's heading north. You can do the cooling there, and that will keep the AMOC running. There was one thing I'd like to show you is some little sums about energy ratios that people were talking about. Could I do a screen share?
I'll just check. My the default is, I need to change the default, so I've done that. So you can share now, please.
Well, tell me what to do to share. I can never remember it.
Okay, what you do is
there's
a
share screen. Yeah.
Yes, just click on
That's right.
share screen down at the bottom.
And then I click onto this. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Right.
Not yet.
This is a tiny bit of PowerPoint. I'm trying to calculate the ratio.
No, it's not coming up. So if you click on share screen, and then at the box that comes up at the bottom right, it says share, and you click that.
That one.
This is looking better.
Yes.
Right. We're trying to calculate the ratio of the solar energy reflected by a cloud to the surface tension energy to make the condensation nucleus. Now, the cloud is the projected area of the cloud drop, which is somewhere between 10 and 28 microns. So I'll say 20 microns. That's the solar input. Over 24 hours, I'm calling it 170. Maybe it could be a bit higher than that. Then there's the reflection coefficient of a cloud drop, which is a bit low. It's only 8%. And then there's the life of the cloud drop, or the nucleus, or whatever the system is. And I'm calling that 1 day, although a little while ago I saw one people saying 3 days was typical. If you multiply all that, each drop will be radiating 369 microjoules. Okay, microjoules. Right, now let's see the energy that we need to make the drop. It depends on the surface area. This is the size of the condensation, diameter of the condensation nucleus, and then multiplied by the surface tension. Okay, so surface area and surface tension, and that for salt water is this much here. And so I need to spend 0.157 picojoules to make the condensation nucleus that this thing grew on. And if I take the ratio of those two, reflected energy over nucleation energy, it's 2.3 times 10 to the 9. Now, the energy efficiency of this is not perfect. And at the moment, I'm estimating it's about 6%. If we just said it was 10%, then we'd still have an energy ratio of 2.3 times 10 to the 8. Now, I don't know any other physical system which has this sort of energy ratio. I hope this would keep Yao Te happy. Okay, that's me.
Yeah, so that's the cooling return on investment from marine cloud brightening is extremely high.
The energy is coming from the wind as well, so you're not burning anything. There's one other thought I like to offer, which is that if you look at stable systems like a ball rolling in a bowl, the shallower the bowl, the longer the period of the rolling. It's a bit like a pendulum. And one of the things that might be indicating that the curvature of the bowl is getting shallower is that the period slows down. Okay, so if you've got something that might be getting unstable, if the phenomenon is got a longer period, that's a marker of what might be happening. And what's going wrong with the jet stream is that the events that it's producing are happening for a longer period. If you have alternating temperatures in a typical climate record, and then you see that they're slowing down, because of a bit of inertia, the slower they go, the higher the extremes. So you'll be getting colder and hotter, but for longer periods. If you change them quickly, it doesn't matter nearly so much because it hasn't got the total temperature doesn't have time to respond. It's the slowing down of the period of the changes to do with the jet stream that is causing the trouble. It can move the either the highs or the lows for longer, and that means they go further. So there's a theory about marbles in bowls being indicating the curvature of the bowl. Okay, end of that transmission.
No, I think the scandal that comes out of what you're saying, Stephen, is that that the cost of addressing climate change through marine cloud brightening is so dramatically order of magnitude lower than the cost of addressing heating by emission reduction, that just means that it's really quite a paradigm shift in terms of how authorities are able to think about global warming. And as is always the case with paradigm shifts, when people are invested in the old paradigm, they are very resistant to the information that is coming out. But I think we do need to think of it in those sorts of psychological and political terms in order to say, why is when you do have such extreme damage caused by the heating of the pole, and the system effect means that damage is spread as far as the southern states of the USA. When you do have that extreme cost, why are people unable to engage in a public conversation about it? So thank you very much for I think the equations sometimes give people a bit of brain strain, but it's good to see them and perhaps to simplify them as an issue. I'll pass on to Herb.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Lots of comments and questions I have, but I'll just focus on a follow-up to something that Manajo said earlier about people basically disparaging SRM. And I hate to bring this up because it depresses me, and I don't want to depress you, but I don't think it'll surprise anybody. I would just want to take a moment to read one paragraph from Bill McKibben's article on SRM in the New Yorker some weeks ago, where he basically quotes from our friends, and of course the part of the problem is this inevitable, infuriating, basic lack of distinction between SRM and SAI. I mean, that's the this fun, when I've read books on language, but how do you get people to recognize that? But anyway, let me just read this. Everyone's studying solar geoengineering seems to agree it's a terrible thing. I mean, how about that for a first sentence? The idea is outlandish, Parker told me. Parker is some scientist. Mohammed Rahman, a Bangladeshi scientist who is one of Degree Initiative's grantees, and they're the group in the in the global south that focuses on SRM, says it's crazy stuff. So did the veteran Hungarian diplomat Janos Pastor, who runs the Carnegie Initiative on Geoengineering Governance, and said people should be suspicious. Pascal Lamy, a former head of the WTO, who was president of the Paris Peace Forum, agreed, saying it would represent a failure. Jesse Reynolds, who, thanks to Robert and others, we had, really lively session with him at an HPAC meeting a couple months ago, a longtime advocate of geoengineering research, who launched the Forum's commission, wrote recently that geoengineering's reluctant supporters are despondent environmentalists who are concerned about climate change and believe that abatement of greenhouse gas emissions may not be enough. Reynolds speaks for this geoengineering community on this point. They are, to a person, willing to acknowledge that reducing emissions by replacing coal, gas, and oil represents a much better solution. I think the basic answer is moving more rapidly out of fossil fuels, Lamy said. I'm a European. I've always been supporting this view. So basically, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I wrote a rebuttal of that McKibben article in the New Yorker, and once again, there's a lot of banging of heads against brick walls, where the critique of those sorts of false claims just gets ignored. It's really bad. So thanks.
As well as stopping coal, you really need time travel.
I just wanted to say that I guess what shocked me was to hear Jesse Reynolds and Lamy, who are running the Overshoot Commission, basically say that would be much better off if we could simply eliminate emissions fast enough. We wouldn't have to do any of this. this fundamental misunderstanding from the people that some of us are pinning at least some of our hopes on, is beyond, almost beyond belief. I mean, these are really sophisticated people who are saying these things, or people I had thought were sophisticated. Anyway, end of my rant.
Thanks. So Doug and then Stephen.
So I'm going to get out of the way here, but John introduced me to John Shepard's napkin sketch, what, 2 years ago, John? And since then, I've learned that Shepard created this sketch for a seminar at Asilomar in California, and I've cleaned it up. I made it nice and pretty here. So I want to bring your attention to the 2 lines that he's labeled as, I can't read it, it's kind of hard. Business as usual is the pink area, and geoengineering is underneath in the blue area. Notice under there, there's CDR and SRM as two different things. CDR is all of the marine cloud brightening, and I'm not sure that's SRM. Sorry, I got it backwards. Anyway, everything under the sun is under the category of geoengineering. And yet Michael Mann and Bill McKibben and all those people refer to everything as geoengineering, including the kitchen sink. So we have a big problem. I think, I don't know what I think, but I just wanted to bring this to your attention that this is from 2010, by the way. Asilomar 2010, John G. Shepard.
Yeah, he has been a virulent attacker of geoengineering. I was at a meeting which he chaired and gave me hell. I mean, really. And I was the only guy there. I really, I was battered and smashed and bonked. And I was advocating ocean iron fertilization at that point. All right.
Thanks, Doug. Now, who was next? I think Stephen. Oh,
I think the reply to the people.
Stephen Penningroth.
Okay.
Okay, I just have a quick question, and that's to Manijo. Manijo, I'd be very interested in the name of your organization in the Hudson Valley, also your white paper and your slides. I live in Ithaca, so I'm about 3 hours away from you. We're both in New York, and I'd just be very interested in what your group is doing. I think public education and outreach is extremely important, and probably will be the key to getting any solutions going. So anyway, if you could put that in the chat, I'd be very grateful.
I'm going to put my email in the chat, and then if you send me an email when I'm not on the call, I can send you the link to the outline and the PowerPoint and the papers. It'll become obvious. And yeah, we're here in the Hudson Valley, new group. My partner in crime is a junior at the local high school who heard me present on this and just glommed on, and he's setting himself up for an amazing future because of what he's learning. And we have, people scattered throughout the region. When I talk to someone, if they express interest, I add them to our little working group. And, it ranges from people who are beginners to people who have some sophisticated knowledge. But I just wanted folks to know. So I'll put my email in the chat, and then if you would email me a request. It's hard for me to do anything while I'm on the call.
Thanks so much, Manijo.
Thank you very much.
Stephen. I think getting these sort of local networks happening is a real key to especially getting young people involved. Like, we haven't got anyone, I think, under maybe Daniel, you're probably under 50, but
yeah, a couple of years.
just looking at the other faces here, it's a bit older. But let's go on to Robert Chris.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, John Shepard he's an oceanographer, And he was chairman of the original panel that did put the Royal Society in the UK that wrote its report on the first real proper report on geoengineering back in 2009. But he hasn't really been that prominent in the geoengineering space since then. So I would treat anything that is quoted or cited from him as being more of historical value than of being current practical value.
Thank God, thank God.
So Peter, you
Robert, do you mind if
can I interject with that?
Yes, Peter.
In fact, John Shepherd phoned me up in 2009. He knew nothing at all about geoengineering. He phoned me and said he'd been asked by the Royal Society to edit a report on this, but he wanted me to explain what it is. He didn't know what the word meant, so I explained a bit. And basically, his contribution to that report was based on coming from a background of total ignorance. So
yeah, so I think so I think one needs to be really careful about some of this material. The other thing I wanted to say was, we talk about a lot of the criticisms of geoengineering from places that are a bit strange, where you wouldn't expect them from. But Robert Tulip circulated a paper yesterday, which is a perfect case in point. There are a lot of commentators on geoengineering generally who are social scientists of one stripe or another. A lot of them are lawyers involved in governance issues. Many of them are sort of folk who are concerned about equity issues and global north, global south type questions. They're not climate scientists, so they tend to take their understanding of the science kind of uncritically from the IPCC primarily, and mostly from the IPCC summaries rather than from the detail. So again, one needs to be very, very careful when listening to or receiving comments from these sort of people, because that there are the level of their knowledge is not always what it would appear to be. And I perhaps should comment here about my own journey in this, because I'm a social scientist as well, although I'm difficult to pigeonhole in this regard. But I'm not a climate scientist, and that's the main point. So when I started out in this in geoengineering, which actually was in 2009, I very quickly came to the view that solar radiation management, as it was kind of called then, it was primarily SAI at that stage, was lunatic. I mean, you had to be crazy to think that anybody was ever going to do that. And I took the view then that when SRM becomes mainstream, that's when we know that we've lost the plot, because the requirement for SRM arises solely because of a failure to act more decisively at a much earlier stage. And we need to remember, so that if in 1990, when the message first went up, we had really got stuck into emissions reduction, we probably wouldn't be having these conversations now, because the problem would have been sorted. But we didn't. And as with each failure to act, as the years and decades have gone on, the problem has mounted, so that the interventions have to become more drastic, more aggressive. And of course, the more aggressive the intervention, well, obviously, the more risk associated with it. I mean, the two things go hand in hand. So inevitably, we are now confronted by a whole stack of options, none of which is very attractive. And the fact that I have in recent months become converted to the notion that SRM, or albedo enhancement, as I prefer to call it now, is now necessary, is not because I don't think it's crazy, because I still think it's crazy, but because it is now necessary. And that is the difference. Now, I think it's crazy. I also think it's necessary. Do I think it will ever be done? Probably not. And that opens up a whole stack of other questions about translating possibilities into reality. And those are fundamentally political questions. And I'm hoping that I'm very wrong on that. but I still think there are huge social and political obstacles into getting SRM or albedo enhancement at climatic scale off the ground, in much the same way that there has been similar resistance to significant emissions reductions. I mean, the stories are very different, but the pressures are very similar. So, and I think that what we are going to see, I mean, we're at the leading edge of this group and HPAC and so on and so forth. We're very much at the leading edge of this. And as more people come into our wake, it'll become more openly talked about. But I think the process will probably happen too slowly to save us from a quite grave situation in 2 or 3 decades' time.
Now, that paper that you mentioned that I circulated was the one on the coming climate wars, and as an analysis of climate security. And I thought it was actually was full of misconceptions that reflected the conversations they had with so-called experts who I didn't think were experts at all. But I think, Robert, in terms of your characterization as crazy, I mean, my view is that human evolution is towards a systems approach. That is, it's simply always been the case that in order to maintain a global civilization, we have to think globally, and that is a paradigm shift for humans who have evolved to think at the clan level, let alone we're gradually moving to think at tribal and national levels. But this idea of taking the approach of we are all on this planet together, like it's started in a lot of the 1960s, small is beautiful type of work, but thinking through the systemic implications, I think that regulating the atmosphere is one of the basic systemic implications of saying that we have to think globally. And so it's not crazy to say that we have to think globally, except from the point of view of people who just find that completely unacceptable. So it's a good area of conversation.
I just to come onto that. I mean, I have to say, Robert, I totally agree with you. And indeed, one of the comments I made some time ago to a climate scientist here in the UK was that I questioned whether we were evolutionarily capable or equipped to deal with a problem like climate change, much for the same reason that you've just described, because humans have never ever been confronted by a challenge of this nature. So we haven't really developed the psychology of approaching problems at global scale. We're just not there. We still think like hunter-gatherers with a little bit of sophistication layered on top. It is a big challenge. And if we are to succeed with dealing with climate change, it will be a remarkable thing, because we will have succeeded at the first attempt. And it's a pretty big issue. So let's try and
the good news, Robert, is that we've got a solution. There's never been a solution which is a complete solution being offered.
I don't accept that, John.
And it is actually very simple. The problem is we're getting a whole lot of denial, and a lot of this denial is driven by the fossil fuel industry, who have taken over IPCC and vet all their reports, so that their reports don't talk about the Arctic, and they don't talk about SRM.
Exactly.
So,
I mean, I want to disagree with you about one critical point, and that is that we've always had solutions. There's never been a time when we did not have a set of acceptable solutions. The problem has always been implementing them at scale and at speed. And because we failed to implement them at scale and at speed, they have effectively gone past their sell-by date. So we've had to kind of invent new solutions. And all right, we've got new solutions, but we're confronted by the same problem of turning those solutions into reality. It's exactly the same problem we've had for the last 30 or more years. And I don't.
We haven't actually had a solution before,
Well,
because
I think
the system has not been analysed before properly, and now that we have a reasonable analysis, we've got done enough analysis of the Earth system to realise that there are tipping points can be reversed. Their processes can be reversed by cooling. What we're not sure, of course, is whether we can put enough SO2 into the stratosphere or enough marine cloud brightening to work. But that is potentially a valid scientific solution.
Yes,
all the other solutions are but based on delusions.
Yeah,
the solution of emissions reduction was based on a lack of understanding of the Earth system.
It was 30 years ago when emissions, greenhouse gas concentration has increased hugely in that period, and emissions have increased hugely. So the circumstances then were very different. In 1990, the IPC was saying that we needed to reduce by 2050, we needed to reduce our emissions to half of their 1980 level, which effectively was just a reduction of 10 gigatons of CO2 a year. And now we're talking about 4 times that in half the time. So I think it's a kind of a moot point now because the world's moved on. But when we talk about cooling obviously works at a global scale, because if you do enhance the albedo, then you will rectify the Earth energy imbalance, and things will cool down. But you will not do that without changing local weather patterns. And changing local weather patterns is going to have huge impact on people's lives. And it's going to be
okay. Hang on, Robert. We are. What we're planning to do is to cool the Arctic such as to reduce weather extremes. And if we do it in a kind of a blanket way or a careful way, we can avoid aggravating the local events. And overall, we can solve the problem. And we need something general understanding. And I'm hoping that Peter Wadhams will take me up on an offer to jointly write a book.
Yes.
Peter?
Yes, happily, yeah. I think it's a very timely thing to do, yeah.
I think we should start that very soon on that, Peter. And are you in the UK?
No, I'm in Italy until April. So, but that's fine. I can get to.
Are you coming over at all?
I hope so. Yes, I haven't been able to travel, but now I can. I had a health.
We usually finish up our meetings at this time. Now, there's a number of people who would like to speak. I'd like to suggest that we invite the people who've indicated a wish to speak to just state their piece briefly and then finish up. So I was particularly wanted to hear from Meta and then Paul Klinkman and Daniel, if that's okay, and perhaps Doug. So Meta first. Unmute, please.
Beg your pardon. Okay, let me see if I can shift the discourse in a direction that is more to my liking. I'm troubled by the dispute over the word geoengineering, and I'm in touch frequently with Peter Fikowski, who avoids the word entirely and advises everybody to avoid the word and just refer to climate restoration, which I think is fine if you can bamboozle people into avoiding the word too. But when then we talk about climate restoration, and that includes both solar engineering, such as cloud brightening, but also carbon removal. And what I'm sensing here is not only is there sort of like a competition, or even worse, a conflict between people endorsing various categories of climate restoration. That is the distinction between carbon emission reduction and say negative emissions or negative cooling measures. That seems to have, if I'm hearing you right, it's like you're having a fight with the people who still believe in carbon emission reductions. I'm surprised, because I assume that of course we have to do emissions reduction, and then that's just not enough. We have to go a whole lot further. So then within the climate restoration thing, there seems, if I'm detecting it, a dispute between which not only has primacy, but which should be respected at all, carbon removal or solar. And I'm surprised, because it seems to me that there too, both are essential. Maybe different technologies in each one. You might choose between one, rather solar management, for example, rather than another, or there are many choices to be made. But it seems to me that the carbon removal is essential, if only because of the fact that the oceans are acidifying, and the solar management is not going to do anything to solve that. And I think we need solar for a different reason, and give them, I would maybe not even want to choose between the two prioritize either one, because both, it seems to me, are urgently needed. And the solar management is necessary, it seems to me, to give us time to do some of the other things, because of the potential tipping points that I think are probably not as quickly managed by carbon removal. So that's the question I would like for somebody to give me a quick and dirty answer to. Are all these things equally important? And I hope your answer is not going to say, yeah, we have to do one and forget about all the others, because I can't see that we can do completely without either reduction of emissions or removal of carbon or solar management. Thank you.
I'd like to just comment in response, Meta, to say that like the Healthy Planet Action Coalition has called for a three-legged stool based on cooling, removing, and reducing. But there's a bit of a conflict between whether climate is understood in political terms or in technical terms, and the technical analysis has suggested that the most immediate major impact on stopping tipping points comes from direct climate cooling, from albedo enhancement, and that's an idea that is just broadly rejected in the IPCC and the climate community. So when you've got a situation where the most important response is rejected on political grounds, that does create a political conflict, and so it's not, I think, that people are saying there's no point in cutting emissions. It's simply placing that understanding of carbon-based approaches against a empirical technical analysis. And yeah, so it's a very lively debate, and thank you for raising the questions. So we will, since there's such enthusiasm for continuing, I'm happy to continue for another 10 minutes or so, and so just invite a couple of final comments from people who have their hands up. So I think Daniel was next. Okay, it looks like Daniel's on mute, but he's passing.
Sorry, I've got unmuted now. I mean, I'm changing the point I was going to make in response actually to what Meta and you've said, and that's following on from this. The carbon dioxide removal and reduction versus SRM, etc. I thought it was just a matter of timescale that basically SRM could have an impact within this decade, for instance, when we really need it. There's rapid tipping points approaching, and we're already getting this huge transitions and destabilization of weather, etc. But it's not just that. And this is something I'd like to ask Stephen to clarify, because I seem to remember he made a comment in one of our email trails that even if we manage to get to net zero, that apparently the oceans will start off-gassing carbon dioxide at a greater rate as we reduce the atmospheric level from our, anthropogenic carbon dioxide. So Stephen, over to you. Could you clarify that point, because it's really profound, I think? And
yes, there's 50 times more CO2 in the oceans than there is in the atmosphere, and whether it goes in or comes out depends on the vapor pressure difference, and we can try to reduce CO2 emissions, which would just leave things where they are. They wouldn't be getting so bad, except for perhaps a bit of a phase lag. Maybe if you could go to zero, you'd still get a bit of warming. Now, the reductions is a brilliant idea if you could do it, but you really need to get time travel working in parallel. What you need to do is to go back to about 1950 levels, and just time travel really seems to be the most effective way to do that. If you look at how difficult it's been to change the slope of the Keeling curve, that's accelerating upwards steadily. So we're not really putting any money at all into time travel, and that's a great.
Which is a very ironic sort of mockery of the thinking around emission reduction, about how impossible some of the ideas that are presented are, and how marginal it is to actual stabilization of the planetary climate. So thank you, Stephen. Look, let's just go on to Jonathan Cole.
Hi, Meta. My belief is that the ecosystem heartbeat of the planet is fading, and it's on trajectory to flatline. So what we've got is a dying patient coming into an emergency room. And when that happens in our hospitals, they don't ask what caused it. They're not concerned about the diabetes or eating too much sugar for too long or whatever. They go through a procedure to bring the patient back to life. And that is what we're doing now with trying to cool the planet. The heat is going to create a flatlining of the biosphere long before the acidity of the ocean or many of these other effects. So we have to deal with that as a critical thing. We have to clear the airway, get the heart started again, essentially. The other point is that a lot of the protective aerosols that are going into space or into our atmosphere are mixed together in these chimneys that are sending out the CO2. And it's wrong-headed to remove those aerosols too quickly. So we're kind of addicted to the type of pollution we're creating, especially the sulfuric emissions from the coal burning. So it's actually a bit dangerous to concentrate on fossil fuel emissions first, or even at the same time, because of the heating from the loss of aerosols. So those are some of the arguments.
Thanks, Jonathan. And we'll just have a final comment from John Nissen and then wind up. Oh, sorry, Doug first.
Thank you. I've got a tough one and an easy one. I'll start with a tough one. About a month or two ago, I kind of came to the conclusion that the world is going to become a bionic world, like a bionic man. We probably will end up mining CO2 forever, like we mine copper and aluminum oil, whatever those, all those ores that we mine from open pit mines. Is this CO2, or pardon me, carbon is just going to be one more extraction industry, and I think it's going to go forever. And I also think that SRM probably will also go forever because of the reasons that Jonathan just mentioned. I don't think it's going to be a decade. That's the hard one. I'll just put that out there. And the easy one is for Robert. You mentioned Shepard back in 2009. I didn't quite understand if you conflated geoengineering with SAI, with SRM, with everything else, or if you actually at that point, if Shepard differentiated as is indicated on this chart, that geoengineering is an umbrella term that includes CDR and SRM, because we have a distinguished scientist and a revered journalist who used all those terms for the same thing, the taboo SAI. So I want to know what your take is on Shepard back in 2009, and if you understand that my understanding is geoengineering is just a big umbrella that includes everything.
Yeah, it is. I've got the document actually open in front of me. The word geoengineering, the report was called Geoengineering the Climate, Science, Governance and Uncertainty, September 2009. And if I recall, I'm just going to search for it because it shouldn't take too long to find it. Oops. Hold on, sorry, type it there.
What do you believe? What do you understand? I want to know what you think.
It was
a feeling you were disparaging him when you made those comments.
No, I wasn't. I wasn't disparaging him, except in the sense that Peter Wadhams was explaining that John Shepard is not as an individual. Climate change is not his métier. It's not his.
It doesn't matter. What do you understand? What is the reality?
The reality is that geoengineering was used in that report to cover all forms of deliberate intervention in the climate to ameliorate climate change.
It doesn't mean just SAI.
Absolutely not. At that time, it included solar radiation management and carbon dioxide removal. They did not, at that point, get into non-carbon.
That's good. I'm with you now. I'm with you. Very good. Thanks.
And it wasn't until the early, about 2010, 2012, that there was a recognition that SRM and CDR were radically different processes. And so there was a divergence and they began to be separated. So geoengineering absolutely was that report was covering everything, but it was absolutely a deliberate intervention. So Hanson's use of it to refer to this kind of historical, that's a different use altogether.
Look, let's just have a final comment from John Nissen. I'd like to wind up the meeting.
Yeah. So to summarize, we have various suggestions from last year. One in particular, which I think we need to take up, which is the idea of getting a group of PRAG members with some communication experts. We did start having a conversation with Nick Breeze to do an interview of Hanson. So there are various things we can follow up from last year in this year, and the other thing is to try and attack to draw attention to the fact that the the Met Office and IPCC are completely underplaying climate change, and they are particularly underplaying what's happening in the Arctic and the tipping points, and they are underplaying the effect of Arctic amplification on weather extremes. So we probably have Hansen as a major ally, perhaps against his co-authors in that paper. So I think Hansen himself would come clean if he was given enough support. So I think that's a real positive thing. And we do have the Centre for Climate Repair at Cambridge as a real strong force for refreezing the Arctic. I think that's something we must play in our hand. Okay, so I'll circulate the paper I've written for AGU, which is about the scientific case for solar radiation management, and SAI in particular is very promising. There are no downsides on a technical level. There may be some on a political level, of course, but on a technical level, it really looks very promising if injected north of 50 or 60 degrees, where the lifetime of the aerosol can be kept down to a few months and not interfere in winter warming or the ozone hole. So thank you very much, everybody, and I look forward to lots of communication, letters, appeals from members. Would be very happy to write to the Victors Institute and explain that there's a lot of sense in applying some kind of cooling. It is really a common sense solution that we're offering. The world is getting too hot and we need to cool it. It's very, very simple in essence what we're saying.
All right, thanks everyone very much for joining the meeting today. Meta?
Yes, I don't know how to save the chat. Do you save them and send them to people? Or
yes, I'll circulate the chat.
If you right click in the chat,
yeah,
and select all, and then right click again and copy.
Okay. Okay. And then I've got, thank you.
Yeah, and then you can
put it
paste
into a Word document.
Okay.
Very good. All right.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Bye, Goldie.
Bye.